This video is on how to do academic writing, which is something that you'll need to make sure that you're writing, especially when you're writing research papers and essays for class. This handout, if you have it, goes with it, and if not, you could just follow along and take notes as we go and pause it to take notes. So basically the first thing is this is a list of do's and don'ts for academic writing. Here are the do's. You do want to write in a clear, plain style and avoid flowery language at all costs. If necessary, throw out your thesaurus. Readers are more impressed by the quality of your ideas that you are using rather than trying to use big words. The only exception is when it's appropriate, you want to use jargon common to your field. You want to use the active voice. Put your verbs to work for you and use direct, clear sentences. Vary your sentence structure. Readers get tired when they read a series of lengthy sentences with multiple clauses, and similarly, they feel rushed by a series of short, terse sentences. So as much as possible, you want to vary your sentences. You want to use consistent tenses. Present tense is the most common when referring to written text. Future tense is almost never used, and the exception is past tense is used for history papers and in reference experiments. So when you've done an experiment, you say what you did in the past. So you want to go through your paper and make sure that your tenses are consistent. Have someone else read your paper before you turn it in to make sure that your writing is clear. So these are the do's. The don'ts are you do not want to use first person pronouns, I, we, me, us, my, and our. The readers know who is writing the paper, so you don't have to say who you are or refer to yourself. You don't need to say, especially don't say I think, because it's your paper, so we know it's what you think. The exception is if the academic paper is asking you to be reflective, or if it's a narrative where you're telling a story, then that's an exception. 2, don't use contractions. This rule is stylistic and the goal is to have a cleaner paper, so don't use words like didn't, can't, and things like that. Don't use archaic terms. So thus, alas, aren't things that you would commonly use in English, and they shouldn't be in your paper. Don't use slang. Don't use cliches. Cliches are casual kind of phrases that you hear often, like too little, too late. That's like a cliche. Don't use qualifiers. Don't say really, very, surely, often, hopefully, basically. When you're trying to make a point, you want to be assertive about the point that you're making or the claim that you're making in your paper. Avoid overused scholarly phrases. Never write at the beginning, in this paper I will. You're writing the paper and clearly will do something, so you don't need to say that you're going to do it, just do it. Try not to write in conclusion at the end of your paper as well. So, in other words, especially with scholarly phrases, try not to write things because you're trying to make yourself sound like you're a professor or you're wiser than you are or something like that. You just want to be straightforward and avoid flowery language. Okay, let's go on to some specific do's and don'ts. Formal academic writing is different from informal spoken English, and the differences can be best seen from a number of examples. So, in general, informal spoken English contains a number of colloquialisms, which means conversational expressions, that are inappropriate for formal written English. It is important not to mix these styles. In other words, you don't want to mix how you would speak to somebody with how you would write an essay for English class. Here's an example. Contractions. It didn't or they've is incorrect. You would want to say it did not or they have. Hesitation fillers like or well should never be in an English paper. Personal pronouns. You don't want to say I think. You don't want to say you put the chemicals in the test tube. You don't want to say we use 2 different research methods. So instead of saying I think this is an effective plan, you can say this could be an effective plan. Instead of saying you put the chemicals in the test tube, say the chemicals are put in the test tube. Instead of saying we used two different methods, say there were two different methods. Personal pronouns are sometimes used but are often avoided by means of a modal verb, could, might, etc., and impersonal words such as it or there or a verb in the passive voice. Here are some also informal or imprecise words that you don't want to use. Lots of, say many. Nice, say excellent, pleasant. Big, say large. Things, be specific, say reasons or problems. Like, say such as. You also don't want to use abbreviated forms. Like it's, say it is. There, say they are. E.g., say for example. Here's a comparison. You're going to compare these two. Look at the difference. This guy Houston, right, he says that people that speak English like native speakers don't think about when to use words like the, they just do it. If you wrote that formally, it would say, Houston has called the English article system photo mechanism through which native speakers use articles correctly but unconsciously. Here are some exercises on formal and informal. Take a look at these and decide if they're formal or informal. Pause the video and see if you can figure out which is which. Here are the answers. B is informal because it says I. C is informal because it says I again and it has a phrase put up with. F is informal because it's the passive voice. It has been proved. It should just say it was proved. G is informal because it says a contraction, he'll have to. And I is informal because it says we'll. Lastly, you want to write definitely. There's a definite way of writing and a tentative way of writing. In other words, you want to be definite about what you say in your writing. The most usual way of expressing caution or a lack of certainty are by verbs or adverbs. So for example, here, appears to, seems to, tends to, or perhaps, possibly, probably. These are words that express uncertainty. Look at the difference between a definite statement and a tentative one. This is definite. Industrialization is viewed as a superior way of life. This is tentative or cautious. Industrialization tends to be viewed as a superior way of life. In here you can see the person that wrote this is definite in their viewpoint, and in here you can see they're more cautious or tentative. You want to be definite in the claims that you're making. Lastly, look at this exercise and pause it. Look at the wording in here and see how could you change A, B, and C to be definite instead of tentative. Pause the video and see what the answers are. Here are the answers. A says likely to, which makes it cautious or tentative. B says tends to be. And C says perhaps. So you want to avoid using words like that in your essays.